I will introduce Stuart Russell, who needs no introduction, which is, of course, why I need to introduce him. Professor Russell is a professor of computer science at UC Berkeley, founder of the Center for Human Compatible AI, and co-author of AI, A Modern Approach, the, I believe, most widely selling textbook on AI. So he knows a little bit of something about kind of how AI works, and he's going to be talking about how to make AI provably beneficial. I will just note that if you're not yet convinced that this might be difficult, Professor Russell is also an adjunct professor of brain surgery at UCSF. So if he says something is hard, you know, he probably knows what he's talking about.
Okay, thank you, David. Thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to speak. So I apologize for the way the display is. You can ignore the notes over there, but I'll read this out. This was actually borrowed from another talk. It says, reminiscing and pontificating, two of the favorite activities of an academic. So, all right, so I'll go through the main points first, then you can go to sleep. Obviously, we want our AI systems to be safe and beneficial. I think everyone kind of agrees with this, and we want that to remain true no matter how capable they become, and this is the important part. I would argue that making sure that they're safe is easier if we design the system. Most ways of building AI systems these days don't involve designing them, which I think is dangerous. But even then, there are ways of designing AI systems, and I'll talk about what I call standard model AI and standard versions of AI safety, refer to the idea that it's safe if it meets the specification. And I'll argue that that's a misleading way of thinking about safety. And as Stuart number one explained, or Stuart Alpha, I think he calls himself, the potential for misalignment between specifications and actual preferences means that we need to do a lot of things differently in AI. And it's not just, okay, let's try to understand safety. It's not enough that it be safe. We also have to know that it's safe. And I believe that that requires us to construct our AI systems on well-founded technological components, assembled in ways that we can verify. And then lastly, and this is really pie in the sky, we need to make sure that unsafe AI systems are not able to run. And that means we have to have a different type of digital ecosystem from what we have now, where all kinds of nefarious software runs almost unchecked. So what I'm talking about really is making AI more like aviation and nuclear power, where there are layers of well-understood, analyzed, verified technologies, and a lot of regulation. The analogy between AI and experimental avant-garde theater came from a conversation I had with someone from aviation, you know, a very old school, rigorous control theorist with an experimental projection. And I asked him what he thought about AI and all this, you know, could we use deep learning to fly airplanes? And he said, well, yeah, it's like experimental avant-garde theater. I mean, I really enjoy going. I never know what to expect, but I don't want those guys flying my airplane or running my country, right? And that's going to be a real culture change for the field. But I think in the end it has to happen. Okay, so AI is about making intelligent machines, and from 50,000 feet, what does that mean? It means machines are intelligent to the extent their actions can be expected to achieve their objectives. And I'll call this the standard model because it pretty much pervades all ways of building AI systems that we have used in the past 70 years or so. There was another model, which is machines are intelligent to the extent that they resemble humans. But that model did not end up controlling the field, and it morphed into cognitive science instead. So you might call this the rationalist view. Initially, it was goal-achieving systems, so logical goals, symbolic planning. Then it became rewards and reinforcement learning, and so on. And regardless of how you go about doing this, right, the goal of AI is general-purpose AI, so systems that can do anything that the human intellect is relevant to, and probably do it much better, because machines have these intrinsic advantages in speed, in memory, in communication bandwidth, that we simply can't approach. And so if they can do what humans can do, they're probably going to end up doing it a lot better in almost all areas. So I'll talk briefly about some approaches to AI, because I think it's probably helpful that people understand that there are different approaches to AI. And what is an approach to AI? It's how do you fill in this box, right? Sensory input comes in, behavior comes out, and this continues over time in a loop with the environment. And how do you connect up the two? What goes in that black box? And deep learning says, okay, a massive quantity of tunable circuit goes in the box, right? Just throw as many billions of tunable circuit elements as you can into the box, and then you optimize the objective by some kind of stochastic gradient descent. And that's been successful in some areas, and not in others. A much earlier approach, and it's usually associated with the name of Friedberg back in the 1950s, said, okay, these are Fortran programs, for those of you who haven't learned Fortran. This is what Fortran programs look like. So you throw Fortran programs into the box, and you optimize the objective by these evolutionary techniques, which amount to stochastic empirical gradient. In other words, you can't compute a derivative of the Fortran program, at least not back then. So you just make changes, and you see if the changes get a better value for the objective. So a stochastic empirical gradient and crossover. So an extra technique that isn't available to the deep learning people to try to find optima in this space. And the point of this example is that, in a sense, Fortran programs are more powerful than circuits, right? They have, built into them, they already have the notion of addressable memories and loops and various other kinds of things that make it very easy to implement Turing machines in Fortran, full Turing capabilities in Fortran programs. But this approach got absolutely nowhere and was abandoned almost immediately. There was a small, I would say, somewhat fringe community of genetic programming people who continue to this day working on this, but it seems like it's not considered a candidate for creating AGI. And then there's the more traditional kind of AI approach, which where knowledge is the central concept, that we build systems that know things. I think that's an important hypothesis. And I think it's probably true of humans. I think human beings know things. So you can acquire the knowledge from learning or communication. Once you have knowledge, you can reason with it based on your current estimate of the state of the world and your knowledge of how the world works. You can deliberate over futures, make plans, produce behavior, right? And a lot of successful AI systems were built in this general paradigm. Deep Blue is a good example of that, but many, many other systems. In the early days, it was logic was the representation of knowledge, logical deliberation, logical planning. In the 90s and 2000s, technology based on probability theory to accommodate uncertainty, both about the state of the world, uncertainty about the dynamics of the world, and the outcomes of actions, and so on. And I'll talk a little bit about probabilistic programs later on. I think it's instructive. These days, it's very hard to convince, especially undergraduate students, that they need to learn anything other than how to download TensorFlow and shovel data through it. So if someone is skeptical that a knowledge-based approach to AI is at all valuable, you could give them this example, right? So 1.2 billion light years away, there was some, and 1.2 billion years ago, there were some black holes that spiraled around each other and eventually collided, and that produced gravitational waves. Quite a big event. The energy output of this event was 50 times the energy output of all the stars in the universe put together. And that produced a gravitational wave that was detected by the LIGO detector. That's a picture of the LIGO detector. And they predicted exactly the signal that they would detect. And so this was the first ever detection of gravitational waves, and was an incredible confirmation of general relativity. So just ask a deep learning person, okay, how would your deep learning system invent the LIGO? Right? And usually they'll just change the subject, right? And say, but have you seen our really cool pictures that we get out of Stable Diffusion? Whereas the knowledge-based story, I mean, this is a knowledge-based story, right? We kind of know that because the perceptual inputs that led to all these theories were perceptual inputs to physicists who died, many of them hundreds of years ago, right? And the knowledge was communicated explicitly. It was acquired and communicated in the form of knowledge, which was then chained together into ever more complex theories of physics and device designs that they could understand. Okay, I think we've also been overestimating how smart our machine learning systems are. And this has happened over and over and over again. But I just wanted to show you one example. This is from OpenAI, a deep reinforcement learning system that in the space of a couple of hours, these humanoid robots start out completely unable to move, right? They're lying on the ground just like newborn babies. All they can do is waggle their limbs randomly. And they learn to sit up and stand up and locomote and eventually to start playing soccer. And I would say, the blue player is clearly better than the red player at being in. The red player is not much of a goalkeeper, I would say. But still, if your newborn baby was playing soccer in the back garden 2 hours after it was born, you would call for an exorcism. So, okay, this looks very impressive. What is the blue guy doing? Oh, he sees where the ball is, he goes to the ball, he looks at the goalkeeper, he finds a way to kick it past the goalkeeper into the goal, right? That's what you're seeing. And you think, okay, it's learned to, the blue guy has learned to score goals in soccer. Right, let me change the behavior of the goalkeeper just a bit. Right, I'm not going to change the blue player at all, exactly the same blue program. Okay, now the red goalkeeper just falls over and waggles his leg in the air. Right, and here's the blue player. Right? So you see that what you were thinking, what you thought you saw in the first video, you were not seeing, right? Your brain was lying to you about what you were seeing. You thought you were seeing someone who was seeing the ball, going to the ball, finding a way to kick past the goalkeeper, right? If that's what you were seeing, it would have done even better in the second video, but it didn't, right? So what you were seeing was something completely alien and not understandable. Maybe something more like a tango, right? That it was like if I had trained them to dance with each other, and then one of the two dance partners fell over, the first dance partner might not know what to do, right? And so it's more like that than actually training two people to play soccer against each other, okay? So we constantly do this. We see examples of successful behavior and we extrapolate, as Stuart pointed out, right? We extrapolate in ways that are totally unjustified, and we overinterpret the success that we're seeing. So you might then ask, well, why am I even asking this question, right? If AI systems are so terrible, why are we worried about it? So I think there is real progress happening, and there's actually other technologies beside deep learning that are making a lot of progress. So I want to ask, what happens if we succeed in that goal of creating general purpose AI? And I don't want to be accused of just talking about doom. So I want to explain why it is we're even doing this, right? Because if there weren't an upside, we wouldn't be doing AI at all. And I think a simple way of thinking about the upside would be that if we had general purpose AI, we could just use it at scale at very, very low cost to do what we already know how to do, right? We know that humans can deliver to each other a high standard of living, right? And by definition, if it's general purpose AI, it can do that. But it can do it at scale and at very little cost. And so we could deliver a high standard of living to everyone on Earth. And that would be about a tenfold increase in the GDP of the world. And if you translate that, using the usual discount factors into a net present value, the cash equivalent of the income stream is about $13.5 quadrillion. So that's a lower bound on the cash value of creating general purpose AI, right? And if you think about it this way, it gives you a clue about why AI has become this subject of geopolitical competition and supremacy, right? Because it would completely revolutionize our entire global system. It would be a far more impactful invention than anything else we've ever invented. And we might be able to do more things too, right? So we could speculate that it could also give us much better health care, extending the health span, improving education for children, accelerating scientific advances, and all kinds of other cool things. But we don't have to make those assumptions to see that by necessity it would be an incredibly valuable thing. But doominess has been around for a while. Alan Turing in 1951 gave a lecture, and here's what he had to say. Right? Seems probable that once the machine thinking method had started, it would not take long to outstrip our feeble powers. At some stage, therefore, we should have to expect the machines to take control. So that's it, right? No ifs, no buts, no apology, no mitigation, no solution, no nothing. Just, this is it, guys. This is going to happen, and there's nothing we can do about it. So why did he think that? And I think, to him at least, it seems obvious, right? Eventually, AI systems will, whether it's with deep learning or some other combination of technologies, will make better real-world decisions than human beings, right? As they are already making better decisions on the Go board and lots of other more narrow application areas. As we generalize and strengthen our technologies, the range of areas where they exceed human capabilities will just grow and grow until it encompasses everything. And I think Turing is saying, look, how do we retain power over entities that are more powerful than us forever? Good question, okay? And he, I think, Turing, and actually he was drawing on earlier work like Samuel Butler's Erewhon from 1872, And he obviously agrees with the anti-machinists in Butler's book, who argue that unless we do something now, our future is sealed. And in Butler's book, they simply ban all machinery of any kind, no matter how simple, right? Knowing that once you go down that road, it's sort of a slippery slope and you fall off the end, so we don't go down that road at all. Maybe at some point we'll need to take that step. I think it would be extraordinarily difficult to do, to say that, okay, maybe we can use computers for databases and communication and so on, but no AI of any kind, no language understanding, no speech recognition, none of that stuff, right? It would be very, very difficult to make that happen, particularly because of that $13.5 quadrillion prize that everyone is chasing. And I would argue that the problem is already happening, right? We already have machinery. It's not very smart, but it is very well protected, that is already making a mess of the world. So here's a simple example, right? The social media content selection or recommender system algorithms, and they choose what we listen to, what we watch, what we read. They have more control over human cognitive intake than any dictator has ever had in history. And yet they are completely or almost completely unregulated. And they are algorithms that are designed to maximize some objective. And I'll say click-through is one example, engagement is another, the amount of time you spend with the media. But let's think about click-through, the probability that you click on the recommended item. And just by coincidence, that's aligned with revenue generation. I'm sure that's a coincidence. I think what the platforms were hoping was that the algorithms would learn what people want. And because if you send them stuff they're totally uninterested in or revolted by, they're not going to click on it. And so the algorithms, this is actually maybe aligned with what people want. That's good. But we quickly learned that that's not actually what happens, right? That clickbait, so things that people click on, even if they don't actually like it once they see it, if you can get people to click on it, that generates the revenue. And so clickbait itself as a category got amplified by the algorithms, right? They learned to recognize clickbait and to present it more often because they got more clicks out of it. And creating filter bubbles, so if you only ever see what the algorithm already knows you want, then your horizon actually shrinks down rather than becoming broader. But even that's not the answer, right? If you want to optimize clicks, right, where we're here, this is not just the immediate probability of a click, but actually the long-term sum of clicks, right? So if you're a reinforcement learning algorithm, you'll maximize the long-term sum of clicks. How do I do that, right? Given that I can't actually get out and grab your finger and make you click on things, right, which would be one solution. You just modify people to be more predictable, right? Reinforcement learning algorithms learn strategies, in other words, conditional action sequences that modify the state of the world in ways that produce more reward. The state of the world for this algorithm is your brain, and so the algorithm modifies your brain so that in the long run you generate more clicks. And it does that by making you more predictable. So it sends you sequences of content items that it has learned are effective in turning you into a different person who can generate more revenue for it. Okay, so this is just a logical consequence of connecting reinforcement learning algorithms to human beings through this type of interface. Okay, and that's it, right? And so if we made the algorithms better, right, what would the outcome be? It would be worse, right? The algorithms right now are really stupid. They don't know that human beings exist. They don't know that we have minds political opinions. They don't know anything about the content of the items that they're sending, right? If they were smarter, better algorithms, the outcome would be much, much worse for human beings. We might even become unrecognizable as people. And in fact, Dylan Hadfield Manel, my student, and another undergrad at Berkeley, proved some theorems showing that under fairly mild conditions about the connection between objectives and the state of the world, this is an inevitable mathematical consequence. And basically, if you leave out pieces of the objective, the algorithms set the things that you left out to extreme values in order to squeeze a little bit of juice out for the things that are in the objective, right? And you can see this. I mean, this sort of happens in all kinds of examples of misaligned objectives, that the things that are left out get set to extreme values, and that causes all kinds of havoc. So we have a methodology that's pervasive in the field, not just in AI actually, but lots of other fields in economics and control theory and operations research, a methodology that leads to worse outcomes as we improve the technology, right? So something's wrong with the very paradigm in which we're working, if that's a property. So we need to get rid of this definition, and I feel partly responsible for sort of promulgating it in the first 3 editions of the textbook. I can only plead that it wasn't my idea. It was just reflecting how the field understood itself. And change it to something different, right? That we want not intelligent machines that once they have an objective are just going to pursue it at all costs, right? We want machines that are beneficial specifically to us, not to cockroaches or aliens, but specifically to humans. And they will be beneficial to the extent that their actions can be expected to achieve our objectives. And in the degenerate case where we manage to exactly copy our objectives into the machine, then we'll have alignment and things will work okay. But that's an extremely degenerate and very rare situation. Or it's a case where, as in a Go program, right, where the universe of the Go program is so restricted that nothing it can do, at least by putting Go pieces on the Go board, can cause any problems for us. Okay, so that's what we would like to have, and obviously it's a more difficult task, right? Because the machines don't have the objective, or at least not direct access to the objective, and so it can be more difficult for them to be beneficial to us. But it's not impossible. And we can turn that general idea into a mathematical framework that we call assistance games. In assistance games, you've got some number of humans who have utility functions, let's say, U1 through UM, and some number of robots. And all the robots have the same payoff, which is the sum of the utilities of the humans, right? And here I just use sum of utilities as an example. This is the utilitarian approach to how you make decisions on behalf of multiple humans. And there are other versions that you could program in instead, but let's just stick with this one because it's easy and it's the right one. The key point here is that the robots don't know what those utilities U1 through UM actually are. And this is crucial, right? And in fact, it's that uncertainty that is going to give us control over these more powerful entities forever. And when you solve these, so that's it. So you literally set the game up like that, and then you can compute solutions, right? You can calculate what is, for any, if I have to add in some dynamics for the world and so on, but what is the Nash equilibrium of the game from the point of view of the robots and from the point of view of the humans. How should they play this game? You can calculate it. And a key characteristic is that as the game itself unfolds, information is going to flow from the humans to the robots about what it is the humans want. Because the humans are going to be in this game, they're going to be acting. They're actually going to have an incentive to teach the robot. So they will act in ways that are pedagogical towards the robot. And the robots will understand, because they're also solving the game, they'll understand the human behavior as conveying information about preferences as well. And some of that human behavior might be giving commands, which the AI systems don't have to take literally at face value, but can take those as evidence of human preferences. The humans could give rewards. They could offer comparisons like, I like it when you do that, I don't like it when you do this, right? Humans might do nothing. That's also evidence about, so if the human does nothing while the robot's behaving, it usually means the robot is doing okay, right? All of this is evidence about human preferences. And we've so far been able to solve games with one human and one robot and actually examine these behaviors in various environments and seen that it basically things happen the way that you want. An important property of this, and I want to emphasize this over and over again, and I think the word alignment causes confusion. The word alignment suggests that first of all you get alignment and then the robots help you. Right? That is, I don't say never, but probably never going to happen. Right? The robots are always going to be acting under uncertainty about what the full human preference structure actually is. Not least because we are uncertain about many aspects of our own preference structure. But even if we weren't, the robots still would have enormous gaps in their understanding, partly because there are things that we have preferences about that have never occurred, or anything like them have ever occurred in the history of the world. But if they did occur, we would have very strong reactions to them one way or another, right? And so, especially for those kinds of things, there'll be uncertainty about what humans would do. And as I said, when you look at the behaviors, you get what you hope for. You get deference to the humans because they're the ones whose utilities matter. You get minimally invasive behavior for actually sort of two reasons. One is you might think it's sort of a risk aversion, like I don't want to mess with parts of the world where I'm not sure what the preferences are, right? So I don't want to violate preferences unintentionally. But there's actually more to it than that. There's a notion that the world is already kind of the way we like it, right? Because we've been acting in the world for a long time, and so we've kind of made it the way we like it. And minimally invasive behavior wouldn't actually necessarily be the right thing to do if you were in a completely ab initio untouched world where humans had never been, right? There would be lots of things about it that we wouldn't like, and doing nothing might not be a safe thing for the robot to do. But the key property is that the robot is going to be willing to be switched off. So Turing actually talked about the possibility that maybe, if we were lucky, we might be able to switch off the power at strategic moments, but even so, our species would still be humbled. But of course, if you really are dealing with a superintelligent AI that really is pursuing some misspecified objective, it's already thought of that, right? Just like your pathetic attempts to defeat Deep Blue or AlphaGo are pathetic, right? Whatever you think of to try to fool it, it's already thought of that, right? And so you're not going to be able to switch it off if it doesn't want you to switch it off. So you have to get it, and this is something that comes up over and over again, right? Any attempts to block undesirable behaviors, you just have to assume that they're going to fail, right? Just like we failed for 6,000 years to write tax laws in such a way that people pay their taxes, right? Despite enormous incentives for us to write the tax laws correctly, we fail over and over and over again because there are very smart, powerful groups who don't want to pay taxes. The only way to do it is they have to want to pay their taxes, right? And same here, right? The machine has to want to be switched off if we want to switch it off. So let's look at that problem, right? So here's our robot. It's actually a hulking 200-kilogram robot, and it has a safety switch on the back. There's the switch. And if you look in the standard model, right, and you say, okay, fetch the coffee, the robot says, okay, you can't fetch the coffee if you're dead, so I need to disable my off switch so that I don't get switched off, and of course that would prevent me from fetching the coffee, right? This is exactly the behavior we want to avoid, right? But it's sort of unavoidable in the standard model because you can't really achieve anything if you're dead. And so the first thing a robot will do will make sure that it can't be switched off. But if you have uncertainty about the objective, right? If instead of saying fetching the coffee is my sole goal in life, right? If it's uncertain about all the rest of human objectives, then it doesn't behave that way. So here's a little toy version of this off-switch problem where here's the robot gets to go first in this game. And there are two main choices, right? So it could take some action pushing the big red button, which might be quite dangerous. You know, maybe this launches the nuclear weapons. Maybe it sets off all the sprinklers in the building. Right? Who knows what it does? And the robot's quite uncertain about the value of this big red button for the human, right? So I've illustrated that with the, I don't know if you can see that. You probably can't. Okay, you can't see my mouse. Anyway, so this uncertainty, this probability distribution is the probability distribution about the utility of pushing the big red button from the point of view of the human. And there's a lot of uncertainty, but the mean of this distribution is positive. The robot could also just switch itself off, in other words, commit suicide, and we'll fix the value of committing suicide to be 0. That's just without lots of generality. And so in this situation, the robot would choose to push the big red button, right? And so the assumption is here that it would not let us switch it off, right? If it doesn't have a choice, right, it could commit suicide or push the big red button. It's just going to push the big red button because it has a positive expected utility. So if we add a third choice, which is to wait and then allow the human to switch it off or not, right? The question is, will it take that choice? Right? And you might say, well, what's the point? Because the robot, if I'm the robot, right, I can already switch myself off. So what's the point of waiting and let the human? If it's a good idea for me to be switched off, I should just do it. And otherwise, I should push the big red button. But actually, the human is in a different decision-making situation than the robot, because the human is the one who knows more about their preferences than the robot. And so if the human doesn't switch me off, what do I learn? I learn that pushing the big red button is actually okay. In other words, I learn that the negative quadrant in my uncertainty distribution disappears. And so if you go through the math, it's very trivial. You can show that in this situation, the robot will always choose to wait, will always allow itself to be switched off, provided that it doesn't know which choice the human will make. So provided that it's uncertain about the utility of the human, then it will always allow itself to be switched off. If it becomes certain about the utility of the human, then it won't. There will be no advantage to allow itself to be switched off. So the incentive to do so disappeared. You had a question, David.
This assumes that the robot is aware and that the human is aware that the act being contemplated is to push this specific red button.
Yeah, in this toy example, right? But as happens with these simple mathematical models, right, it does generalize appropriately. Anyway, so you can prove this. It's a trivial theorem. It's exactly analogous to the non-negative expected value of information. And in a sense, you can see that the human, by making this choice, conveys information to the robot about the preference function. And so the robot wants that information, and therefore it has an incentive to try to get it. And so this is the core, I think, of why uncertainty about preferences gives us control over the robot. And you can elaborate this in all kinds of ways. You can make the human not perfectly rational. You can have a cost for asking the question of the human, like annoying the human all the time, and so on and so forth. And it behaves exactly as you'd expect, right? The more the cost of annoying the human, the more often the human's going to have to put up with the robot doing slightly suboptimal things, and so on and so forth. So everything behaves itself. Okay, so there are tons and tons of important open questions, right, which are still really basic research questions that we need to solve. Some of them are not new, of course. So the first set of questions have to do with the fact that human preferences are very complicated, and the preferences of many humans are even more complicated. Some of them have to do with the fact that even given our preferences, our behavior is far from perfect, and that is something that Stuart number 1 talked about quite a bit. And then we have to deal with the fact that the machines aren't perfect either, and they're never going to be perfect. So what should we actually be trying to prove about them, given that they're nowhere close to being rational either? So when we think about real human preference functions, first of all, for an individual human, they could be very, very complex. They're almost certainly going to need to be expressed in terms of latent variables like health and physical security. They're not, I don't want you to think of this as at least if you're a deep learning person, you're probably thinking of, okay, how do I map from video to a number, or 2 videos to a ranking of the 2 videos, right? That's not really how we think about preference functions. We think about them in terms of things like health and physical safety and agency and various other abstract properties. And there's also the question of how we learn these. Do we have to learn it from scratch for every different human being? Almost certainly not, right? I think there's a massive amount of commonality across humans, so how do we capture that and take advantage of it so that systems are not starting from scratch with every new person? I think it's also interesting that that the textual record, right, everything we've ever written down, contains massive amounts of information about human preferences. And it's kind of interesting when you read text from that point of view, it just starts like flooding off the page at you. You realize how much is implicit just in the fact that people said something, right? So the oldest text we know about is some of the most boring text that's ever been written, right? It says, Joe brought 5 camels to the market and traded them with Mary for 20 bushels of corn, right? And on and on and on, like this. So you learn something about the relative value of corn and camels from that. That's interesting. But what you learn also is from the fact that this was what they chose, having figured out how to write, this is what they chose to write on those valuable, time-consuming clay tablet things, right? that tells you something about the importance of those types of material goods and knowledge of the trade and records of it to the organization of those societies and so on. So it's a little bit vague exactly what it means, but it means it's really important. So there's tons and tons of information, and it's in various different explicit and implicit forms. There's also a lot of information that psychologists have developed, arguing that the simple notion of RSAS primed, right, which actually goes back to a paper by Samuelson, economist, in about 1930, I think, arguing that we should think about utilities of histories, utilities of sequences of states and actions as sums of rewards associated with transitions. He was mainly arguing because it's mathematically straightforward to do things that way. And later on, there were some theorems showing that under various stationarity properties of preferences that it is in fact the only solution. But real human preferences, and certainly people like Daniel Kahneman have done a pretty convincing research to show this. They're not just preferences on state action sequences, right? Or at least the state has to include mental state, because it matters whether you know what's going on, not just what's going on, but you know what's going on. That's important to your happiness, right? Obviously. And yet, none of our models actually capture that correctly. Memory is something you carry with you afterwards, right? But whether it's memory of good events or bad events has a massive impact on you. So it's not just that a bad thing happened, but it's that I have to remember the damn thing for the next 50 years, right? And so now we have lots of PTSD treatments to try to help you forget the bad things so that you can get on with the rest of your life. Anticipation of good or bad things happening in the future also have a huge impact on your well-being. And then autonomy itself, right? The counterfactual ability to choose what isn't in your own best interests, right, is really important to us. And how do we even take that into account? How do you formulate that in standard sort of MDP language is not clear. Another big issue is that if you're going to take a sort of Bayesian approach to this, where the AI system starts out uncertain about human preferences, learns more over time, there's a danger of model misspecification, that if you have a prior that's too narrow, that actually rules out the true utility function because it doesn't include it in its hypothesis space, then the learning process converges to an exact belief in an incorrect utility function. And that's exactly what we want to avoid, right? That a system believes 100% in the wrong utility function. So can we write priors in a way that are universal for what human preferences could be? That's a really difficult thing. It is the case that you can allow a little bit of error, right? So an AI system optimizing for an incorrect utility function isn't the end of the world as long as it's close enough to the true utility, and you hope that the improved ability to optimize makes up for the fact that it's optimizing the wrong thing, and will still end up being better off than if we were trying to optimize our own utility function unaided. The most difficult problem about real human preferences, I think, is plasticity. The fact that they can be changed by external influences causes all kinds of problems. Right? The most obvious is, should I optimize for you today or you tomorrow? Right? Given that I'm going to take an action that affects you tomorrow, right? That's a problem that doesn't seem to have an answer as far as we know. Yep. Okay, 10 minutes. Oh, good. Got it. And then how do we avoid AI systems that manipulate our preferences to make them easier to satisfy? And maybe the most important is the fact that the preferences we have actually not autonomously acquired, right? They're the result of our upbringing and our society, and sometimes deliberate manipulation by those in power to actually enjoy our oppression. And so should AI systems even take our preferences at face value or not? It's a really difficult question. Okay, so I think Stuart number one already dealt with this issue of the fact that our behavior is generated by the combination of our preferences, theta in my notation, and our decision-making processes, F, and it may not always be easy to separate our decision process from our preferences, because we actually need to optimize on behalf of the preferences. So if we don't separate those two things correctly, we could end up optimizing on behalf of something that actually doesn't represent human preferences correctly. So we have to somehow have a way of learning about F separately from learning about theta. And the way economists have done this for decades is we ask humans to make decisions in situations that are very, very, very straightforward. Would you like an apple or $10? Here. And what you choose, it's assumed that in that case you choose what you prefer, right? And then you can extrapolate from there. Okay, and then real machines, I think, the best we're going to be able to do is to prove that despite the machine's limitations, that in expectation, we're better off using that limited machine than trying to make our own decisions. Okay, more open issues. Developing the theory of multi-human assistance games, so more than one human, you immediately get questions of strategic interactions among the humans, that they will lie about their preferences in order to get more help from the robot. So the robot has to understand that it's in that game and basically invoke mechanisms that prevent the kind of strategic interaction. We have to make basic assumptions about comparability of human preferences, because if we're going to do anything like what I suggested before, summing up the utilities, those utilities have got to be on commensurable scales, right? And some economists have argued, actually, that it's completely meaningless to do that, right? Which means that the only kind of optimality you can aim for is Pareto optimality, that this decision is strictly better because everybody prefers it, or at least nobody disprefers this decision. I actually think that's nonsense, right? No one really thinks that. Economists may want to state that as an axiom, that interpersonal comparisons are meaningless, but no one really believes that Jeff Bezos waiting 1 microsecond longer for his private jet to arrive is incomparable to mother watching her child die of starvation over 3 months, right? But that's what the axiom says, that those two things cannot be ranked. One is not necessarily more important or less important than the other. Okay, so, but as I said, no one actually believes that axiom. Other questions, again, Stuart one mentioned this, actions that change the number of humans, like China's one-child policy got rid of 500 million people, which we would usually think is an incredible atrocity, right, to extinguish the lives of 500 million people. They just happen to be potential people and not current people. So how do we make decisions about that? Okay, I'm going to have to skip over the generalized social aggregation theorem, but you can read about it in our papers. And then similar questions come up when you have multiple robots in the game, and you want to make sure, again, that we don't get unfortunate strategic interactions among the robots, particularly if we have billions of them. Even if they're all aligned with, if they're all playing the assistance game, they're all trying to do the best for humanity, perhaps there could be really bad sort of prisoner's dilemma kinds of interactions. I think not, because it's a common payoff game, and those don't usually have those kinds of strategic problems. They certainly have coordination problems, which we have to deal with. But maybe the fact that it's also open source, that they could exchange their code with each other, maybe we'll be able to find good zero-shot solutions to the coordination problems. Embeddedness is another question. So all the standard theories of rational decision-making assume basically that you can't change your own code, that the actions only affect the outside world, not the algorithm that's making the decisions. And of course, in the real world, our agents are embedded in their own environment, and we have to make sure that they don't mess with themselves in the wrong way. And then if we're going to compete, I think, with the sort of headlong rush that's happening in the AI world, particularly in the commercial world, we have to show that safe, well-designed solutions are competitive in terms of functionality with tools produced by other approaches. Okay, very briefly I'll go through the other points I wanted to make. So first of all, what could we use in terms of well-founded technological components, things we actually understand what they're doing, and we can prove properties about the systems we build as a result. So probabilistic programming is one technology which basically combines probability theory with any Turing equivalent formalism, whether it's programming languages or first-order logic. Gives you enormous improvements in expressive power compared to circuit-based languages, and they can pretty much do anything you want. They come with general-purpose inference algorithms, so you write, in theory, you write one inference algorithm, and then for any model, any data, any query, they can give you the answers you need, and you can get nice cumulative learning, which is very hard to get with deep learning systems, where the stuff you learn feeds back into the learning process so that you can learn better from the next time. And it's growing. It's sort of a stealth field, but it's actually quite large now, about 2,500 papers in 2020. One example, the monitoring system for the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty is a probabilistic program that runs in Vienna. It pretty much runs on a laptop, but in real time it's responsible for detecting and identifying all the seismic events on the entire planet. So it produces a daily bulletin of all the events and where they happened and how big they were and whether they were potentially suspicious and so on. And it's formulated as a probability problem. So there's evidence, the raw data, there's a query, what happened, and there's a model which we write as a probabilistic program that looks like that. So that is the probabilistic program. That is the monitoring algorithm for the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Took about half an hour to write. Works more than twice as well as 100 years of seismology research was able to produce before that. So just an example to show that there are technologies other than deep learning that can do really well on really hard problems, and they can be, in some sense, very straightforward. And this is just showing successful detection of a nuclear explosion in North Korea back in 2013. Okay, verification is actually much more powerful than most people think. When you ask a typical Silicon Valley programmer, why don't you, verify that your code is correct? They'll say, oh, we know verification doesn't work, right? We tried that in the 60s, yeah, it doesn't work, right? Well, actually, time has passed since the 60s, and quite big systems are fully verified, including if you have any iOS device, if you have an iPhone or an iPad, the kernel for the operating system is fully verified. If you ever take an Airbus, the avionics is fully verified. If you take a metro in Paris, it's fully verified. So there are very, very capable verification systems, and I think the pendulum is swinging, right? I think the gate is opened, and we will start to see much greater use of these technologies, and not just verification, but also synthesis. And you can use as much deep learning as you want to guide the synthesis process to make it run more efficiently. But the point is you end up with code that's guaranteed to be correct, not just code that looks like someone else's code that they hoped was correct, right? But code that is guaranteed to be correct. Then the last point, which I mentioned at the beginning, we have already a pretty bad digital ecosystem, and some estimates of cybercrime are running at $6 trillion a year for the cost, not necessarily the revenues of cybercrime, but the cost, the collateral damage to the world. And that's 10 times the software industry, right? It's also 10 times the semiconductor industry. So something is seriously wrong when we are imposing costs on the world that are 10 times bigger than the revenues of the industry that are supposed to be generating the benefits. Right? So it's a sort of weird situation. And it's causing the internet to actually disappear because all the major players now have moved off the internet and are running private networks with higher levels of security than the internet can provide. And the reason this is relevant is we have to prevent, so if we develop safe AI, it's not enough. Right? We have to prevent unsafe AI from being deployed. And I think passing laws even, let alone codes of conduct or principles, but even laws are not enough, as we know, to prevent those kinds of events from happening. So I think we need that the digital ecosystem itself won't run non-certified, unsafe AI systems. So we need something like proof-carrying code, where software carries with it checkable proofs that it's safe, that it conforms to the required standards. And those proofs can be checked by hardware that very efficiently. And so getting there from here is obviously a huge challenge, but I don't see any other way to do it. Okay, so I'll summarize, what I said. There's a lot of work to do, and I think, but we can do it, and I think the right way to go is to start with small and safe, and then gradually increase the capabilities of the systems, but while remaining within this methodology of provable, safe, and beneficial AI. Thanks.